Welcome to Observation Lab. In this video, I'll talk about the fundamental nature of thought and the thinking process. Before you begin meditation, it's important to understand how thoughts actually work. Most people start meditation with yoga or other similar practices. But once you actually sit down to meditate, understanding your thoughts becomes really important. If we understand how our thoughts work, we can better observe them as they come and go. Now, you might argue, isn't meditation already about observing our thoughts? Why do I need to understand it first? That's a fair point. But I think it's a bit like laying a foundation. If you understand the basics, the practice becomes much easier and deeper. So before we meditate, let's talk a bit about thought and how thinking works. Thinking about thinking is actually quite fascinating. These days, there is a lot of excitement around AI, especially large language models. It almost seems like computers are starting to think too. In a way, we can compare how they work to how we think. Our thoughts are shaped by many things: our past, our experiences, our education, and so on. And here is something interesting. We think we are observing our thoughts as if there is a me watching them. But that me, that observer is also created by thought. This creates a strange situation. How can you observe the observer? It makes the whole thing more complex and more intriguing. Let me give you an example. How often do you play back a conversation in your mind? Maybe it was something you said at a party to your spouse, your friend, or a family member. It might have been something small or maybe even unpleasant. But your mind keeps going back to it again and again. Now imagine doing that out loud with someone, repeating the same story again and again and again. It would be annoying, right? But the mind does that all the time. It repeats these stories on its own. It's kind of funny and kind of strange. At first, your mind creates an image of who you are. It puts together your past, your experiences, and your identity. Then it starts protecting that image. You can call this the illusory self. This is where thinking begins to go off track. It starts believing it can fix everything. But here is the problem. The mind tries to manage thoughts with more thoughts. It's like trying to fix one folder on your computer by creating another folder. That does not really solve the problem. Or imagine a blackboard. You draw something on it, numbers, equations, or pictures. Let's say you don't like one of the drawings. What do? You try to erase it by scribbling over it. Or you try to draw something else to hide it. This is how our mind works too. It tries to erase a thought by layering other thoughts on top. It tries to get rid of the bad ones. But here is the thing. It does not actually have an eraser. It just piles on more stuff. And instead of solving the problem, it makes the blackboard messier. Sometimes we think our thoughts are under control. We believe we're aware of them. But that awareness can also be just another thought. Thoughts keep multiplying. And they often do that without us even realizing it. That's why understanding the limits of thought is important. Yes, thoughts are useful. We need them to plan, to be creative, and to make decisions. But at the same time, they are always trying to protect this made up version of ourselves. This version is just a mental image, but to us it feels very real. That's why it's good to understand all this before we meditate. Sometimes your thoughts will tell you, "Don't worry, I've got this, I can solve this." But usually they can't. There is an old story that explains this. A Mahasiddha, a great master, was once approached by a man. The man wanted to be a great hunter. He asked the Mahasiddha for a special mantra. The Mahasiddha agreed, but he gave the man one condition. You can use this mantra, but never think about monkeys while using it. As you can guess, the moment the man left, he started thinking only about monkeys. He saw monkeys everywhere, even in his own reflection. He couldn't stop. Finally, he went back to the Mahasiddha and said, "I can't do it. I'm always thinking about monkeys now." This story shows how tricky our mind is. Sometimes the harder we try not to think about something, the more it sticks. It's a funny story, but it says something deep. It reminds us to be humble. It shows us that we don't always have control over our thoughts, even when we think we do. This brings us to an interesting question. Is there something beyond thought? Something more intelligent? Well, thoughts themselves try to identify this alternative, but they're still doing it from inside the same system. Even when we think we are being mindful or observing carefully, it's often the same pattern playing out again. All right, I'll continue discussing this topic and expanding on it in the next episode. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you next time.